Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to step outside the box a little bit and talk about something except drying in response to drying, but something that is very relevant to what we do or could do or what services that you can sell in the future. In this industry, as pretty much any job you have, power is knowledge. And the more knowledge you have of building construction and building science, the better leg up you'll have on your competition. Not to mention, you don't want to get involved in trying to dry a building that has some of the things we're going to talk about in this slideshow and start drying that building and dry it incorrectly because you did not have the information that you're going to gain here today. Excuse me. We're going to talk about flood resistant homes. And you say, what is a flood resistant home? Well, it's a home that's not necessarily not going to get flooded, but you're going to prepare the home either before the fact or after the fact to make it where it is resistant. Or you're going to dry a building that someone has already made resistant from flooding, and you're going to need to know some of the details about what type of material that you're drying and how you expect that material to respond. This program was written for Louisiana. As you know, they have a lot of flooding down there, particularly if the levees get breached or some of the gates or pumps don't work and stuff like that. So they're looking at ways down there, as well as it'll work anywhere else in the country, to make these buildings more flood resistant. A lot of challenges to it. There's a lot of benefits to it, but it also comes with a cost. When you go to make a building flood resistant, it's not free of charge for the people who are building it or doing the repairs, and that could be you. A lot of challenges in those as far as flooding goes. Of course, the most floods are natural disasters in the U.S. It could just be a pop-up shower that is real heavy and causes some street flooding that get into some homes. An overwhelming majority of the homes that we dry during floods have very little water in them, 2, 3, 4 inches of water in them. You'll have some that get extremely deep water in them, and that's really in a flood prone area. But a lot of the areas that get caught in flash flooding don't really have that much water in them. They get, like I said, 2, 3, 4 inches of water, but it still wreaks havoc on the home if it's not controlled correctly. If you can get in there and control it correctly, you can substantially reduce the amount of damage and, more importantly for the homeowner, the amount of time that they are out of it. So several choices for that, doing that homeowners have with their insurance company claims and disaster assistance and building codes and a lot of different things such as that. So it's something that's new and upcoming. Strategies for flood resistance. Strategies would be to make the home as flood resistant as you can. Make it to where, okay, I'm getting water in it, or we want to attempt to keep water out of it. Maybe we've all seen the guy with the tape commercial where he's got the flood tape and he puts on the home and it holds the water out. That may work. Not sure it will. It's better than nothing and would appear to be a little better than sandbags. So, but that's one of the minor ways of trying to keep water out of a home, particularly if you're only dealing with a few inches of water. You can, of course, number one is make sure you're not in a flood prone area. Is plan A for strategies for not getting flooded. Elevate the buildings. You've all seen when they build buildings back that they put them on stilts, or they have to be elevated to a certain height by building code to put them back. If you're elevating an existing building, that can be fairly expensive. If you're working on an elevated home, then you're a lot of times it's not going to be dealing with water that's near as deep. Using flood resistant materials. There's several different types of flood resistant materials that we're going to talk about today. Now, there's two things you need to know about flood resistant materials. One thing you need to know as a drying contractor, you need to know how they dry. Do they dry quick? Do they dry slow? Just because they're flood resistant don't mean that they still don't need dried. Which ones can you clean and which ones can you not clean? And such as that. So avoidance is a preferred option of flood resistance, and that's just avoid water from getting in altogether. Again, keep the water away from flood prone areas, elevate them, build on a hill. But when you do get flooding from groundwater, the avoidance strategy is probably the most safe that you can have. Water exclusion strategy is preventing or minimizing water getting in the building. You can have barriers put in place. The most extreme barrier would be a moat, or not a moat, but a levee around the house that would keep the water out to where you'd actually put your house in a levee, and then you just have to worry about pumping out the rainwater and not really worry about rising water that much, as long as it don't topple or breach the levee. So that's one way of doing it. Then another strategy would be to would be to use suitable materials that can get wet, but they don't do that much damage. But the exclusion strategy is to try to keep the water out of homes. One event I seen that sort of kind of looked redneck, but it worked for the guy. In Kentucky, he had a double wide mobile home, and he got flooded a couple of 3 times, and he went in and put pontoons under all of the steel girders in the mobile home. And then he changed his electrical to where it could go up and down, so it's much like a floating boat dock at that point. The next flood he had, it worked, and they had him all on TV, and it was showing that the double wide mobile home just raised up with the flood waters. When the flood waters went down, it went back down to the ground. So that was a unique way of doing that to avoid water from getting into the building. You've all seen the levees in New Orleans, to where they build them. They have floodgates on them, as you can see there on the right side of the picture. They leave the floodgates open during normal times where water can flow freely. But then when the water starts to rise, they lower the floodgates to keep it from coming in. So unless the water gets to the area of the top of that wall, then they don't have flooded buildings and land that are beyond that point. As you know, New Orleans sits below sea level, which is sort of an oxymoron within itself, but because of their flood systems and their levees around it, they seem to stay pretty dry, except during Katrina. When the levees got breached in Katrina, they also had several pump stations that were not operative because of electrical failures and pump failures and everything. And that's what caused the catastrophic flooding of Katrina down into the New Orleans area. Again, even if you have buildings that are going to be in those areas, if you use different types of material, that's not going to be so much acceptable to water. You can have different materials, again, that can get wet. Concrete block's a good example. You're not going to hurt concrete block when it gets wet. However, you need weep holes at the bottom of it, of the concrete block, which actually allows water in, but it also allows water to get out as soon as the water level goes back down. If water gets over into the top of a concrete block core and fills the core up and it can't get out the bottom, it'll sit there stagnant and weep out over a period of months and months and months, and you'll wonder why you can't get the wall dry. So you have to have weep holes at the bottom if you use concrete blocks. There is there's other materials. They make a waterproof sheetrock now that would make waterproof floor covering and several different waterproof items. It don't mean you don't have to do some drying, because anytime you've got that, you've got water under it or behind it that still has to be dried out, but they are waterproof materials and they're not porous. Now, we talk about Cat 3 water a lot, and when you have a porous material that gets Cat 3 water on it, then you obviously have to remove that. But if the material is not porous and it gets Cat 3 water on it, it can be properly disinfected and remediated and left in place. So you just have to know what you're drying. One of the last things you want to do is go out and do a ton of demo on a commercial or residential house, and then only to find out later that it had waterproof sheetrock, waterproof flooring, and different things like that, and you've already torn all of it out and discarded it when it wasn't necessary. So you need to know what materials you're drying before you dry them at all times. You hear the news talking about a 100-year flood zone, a 50-year flood zone. That means that they are predicting that you won't have a flood in that area, in this case of this screen, for 100 years. It actually means that you have a 1% probability that you'll have a flood there in 100 years. So a 26% in 30 years would be the mortgage term that they're looking at, but wind codes are higher. That's assuming levees hold, whether it's in Louisiana or where it is. But I've seen 100-year flood zones that have flooded 3 times in my life. So that is just a estimation that is put out by the federal government and the Corps of Engineers about a 100-year flood zone or a 50-year flood zone. With resilient housing, you can restore those quickly. They're very easy to dry. They don't take much time to dry them. You don't have a lot of demo, and you can save people from having to move out of the house for a long period of time. It's more of a cleaning project, and with some drying. I dried a high-rise in Miami, Florida, supplied the equipment for a company, and they're drying it. And it took a day to get all the equipment put in place, and 24 hours later, it was totally dry. And you say, well, that's impossible. Stuff don't dry that quick. It's like drying a piece of glass or a piece of plastic when you're dealing with waterproof materials that are in the buildings. So whether it's from a flood or freshwater break or wind-driven rain, when you're drying something that's waterproof, if you will, it's not very hard to dry at all. So, but it reduces downtime on buildings. That's why some buildings are going to that now. I think you'll see more of that in the future. Another reason that you'll see buildings doing that in the future is to reduce insurance rates when they're in areas that are prone to natural disasters of any kind like that. Insurance will get lower when you do that. Deductibles are always getting higher with insurance companies. So if a building, somebody can build a building, whether it be single family dwelling or commercial, and they know that it can be dried quickly and everything dried in place, then a lot of times they'll probably raise their deductible so they get a cheaper insurance rate. And so that's a big advantage to some people now. You have a lot less damage in homes when you do that, and again, makes it easier to dry. If you've never seen waterproof sheetrock, find some and see it. Some of the stores that sell it will have it advertised. They'll have a glass aquarium or a glass jug there with a piece of drywall or sheetrock in there soaking, and then you can take that drywall or sheetrock out and inspect it and look at it it's a pretty amazing material. It's about 3 times the price of normal sheetrock, so it's still a little pricey. Floor, with Hardy Floor, you remove the molding and the wainscoting. You can flush it with cleaning solutions and sanitizing rinse, hospital grade sanitizers. You can speed dry that thing really quick. So you can restore homes in days, to where now we're going in there and we're drying the framing, we're drying the subfloor, you're drying different aspects of the building, and then you're waiting months and months and months to get the people's home repaired and actually get them moved back in to where they can live back in the house again. And that will cut out a lot of that and speed up that process. Examples of resilient materials, you can find them pretty much all in the country now. Not really popular yet, but they'll get that away before too long. I know a lot of the hotels that are on the coast now have done away with first floor accommodations. They've got an elevator lobby in the first floor. It's very small, maybe 1,000 or 1,500 square feet of elevator lobby, and then they've got parking garage or other things down there that's simply a concrete block structure that's very easy to pressure wash and dry when they have a flood. They simply run the elevator car up to the top floor when the floodwaters start coming in, and they're in business the next morning because they have very little damage. That's another way they're doing on high rises to keep the water out of buildings. In the buildings that are built with materials made to be very resilient, they use what they call paperless drywalls, the same I'm calling as waterproof. It don't wick water up at all. If water gets on it, it'll hold water. It's sort of almost like a sheet of plastic, but built a little different. The wainscoting's removable and replaceable. It's just a snap together system. So is baseboard and moldings. If they use closed cell insulation, which is a spray foam most of the time, and they spray that in there, it's closed cell, it's watertight, water cannot penetrate it, and you just have a sealed package there that water cannot get into. So you pop the wainscoting off, the trim and the wainscoting, you clean and sanitize the closed cell insulation. Takes a day or two to dry it and put it all back together, and bam, they're back in business. So you're going to see some of these. And again, the last thing you want to do is go in there and have a bunch of labor come in and strip out that closed cell insulation that didn't need to be stripped out, and then to explain why you did it later, and they'll be trying to make you pay for it. So the fact you didn't know it was closed cell is not going to float. We portray ourselves in this industry as professionals, so we're supposed to know the material that we're drying. So that's what I want you to look at today, is different systems and different ways of knowing actually what you do have drying. Fibered cement, vinyl siding, brick veneer with drainage. As long as you can get to that material where you can dry it a little bit. Our brick veneers on the outside of the building, so we don't even worry about having to wash the backside of it too much, unless it was just raw sewage water or something. But you can't tear the brick off of a house to wash it, but it's on the outside anyway, so that's not something we're going to worry about extremely quick. Existing homes that are in flood area face a lot more challenges. There are limited options to exclude flooding. Raising an existing house is extremely difficult, extremely expensive in most cases. Get the right kind of house and the right moving company in there, and they just pick it up and then put new supports under it. May not be too bad, but most people are not going to do it. Insurance companies will not pay for prevention. They only pay for damage as a result of a covered peril. So the insurance company won't participate in helping pay for that. That's going to be something that the building owner has to take out of their pocket. So you see more of them done in areas of extreme flooding, like riverfront properties, and or where the government has mandated to have a building there that they have to be raised. So that's where you're going to see those more than anything. Of course, as long as the flood water don't get into them, they're not going to be a concern of the restoration contractors to go in there and do anything with. But again, sometimes they may be raised and you may get 2 or 3 inches of water in there. So you've got to be able to look out for that and then see what type of materials that you are trying to dry. Existing homes that you find water in, the things they can do and that you can recommend to your clients when you're pre-selling or when you're maybe speaking at the Chamber of Commerce or some other things is, elevate your appliances. Put your water heater up on a 3-foot water heater stand and put your outdoor heating and air unit up on a 3-foot stand, or higher or whatever to get it out of that flood prone area to where when you do get a couple of feet of water in the street and it comes up in the home a little bit, it keeps those major appliances high and dry. It makes everything easier. And then, keep the outside of the house tight. If you've got a couple of feet of concrete block in the crawl space and it don't get too deep, then hopefully, for the homeowner, you're out there just drying the crawl space and they really didn't have a ton of damage other than that. So the materials, if it is Cat 3 water, which would be flood water, they do have to be sanitized and cleaned. If they're non-porous, if they're porous, they need to come out. So there is a debate about wind-driven rain being Cat 3. The IICRC, I believe, recommends or notices that it could be Cat 3. It leaves it to the contractor discretion, I do believe, for the classification. I would not just immediately go in and start ripping out a lot of materials from wind-driven rain. I would have it tested. My analogy of it is you go to the ocean and the kids play in the ocean and the wind's blowing and it's spraying water all over your kids, and you don't consider that Cat 3. If they go outside during a rainstorm and play in a water puddle, you don't consider that Cat 3. I understand floodwaters Cat 3 because floodwaters have sewage in it, have pesticides, they have petroleum products, have every nasty thing that you can imagine laying on the ground in floodwater. But I'm talking about wind-driven rain. So I'd have that tested, whether it be porous materials or not, but have that tested before you go in and just start tearing a lot of stuff out. You want to cover your backside that you don't tear it out and then some insurance adjuster come in and so, we took 20 samples and we've had this tested and it don't meet the criteria for Category 3. So just be a little bit careful with that. So if your appliances do get underwater even by a few inches and you got insulation inside like a water heater or washer and dryer or something like that, you can still have problems with that, but hopefully people can get those elevated and not have nearly as much damage in them. Flood resistant materials we're talking about. Now this is probably a more extreme one where they've got extra wide baseboard. They've got wallboard that is, we'll call it waterproof or paperless, if you will. But notice where they've got the baseboard in the back of the picture and they've got the wallboard ends a couple of inches off of the floor. Let's keep that wallboard from wicking water up if it's just water that's gotten in on the floor. They also have a gap in the wallboard where your chair rail or wainscoting is to keep the water from wicking past that gap. Once your water can't wick up through there, if it hits a gap, it's not going to wick any further. So those are some things when you're talking to people that you can advise them will be very helpful, to put within their structure if they're rebuilding it from a flood or they're going to it. Wallboard should never be set on the floor anyway, because you get vibration in the floor, it'll crack the sheetrock. So it should always be raised a little, but it's common practice to raise it about a half an inch. But when you're putting up a 3.5 inch baseboard, or maybe even as seen in this picture, a 5.25 inch baseboard, there's no reason that you can't raise that up a little bit higher than that as well. More flood resistant materials with floor covering if homes are being built or renovated in an area that there is flooding. If you use stamped concrete for the floor covering, you can't tell the difference between a lot of your stamped concrete these days and vinyl floor covering or hardwood or anything else, but you can't hurt it. I mean, it's just like the same concrete you'd put outside your house. It's just got color and stamped in it with lines grooved in it, and you can simply clean it and put a hospital grade disinfectant on it, and your floor covering's ready to go. The picture at the bottom here, you see where they're elevating a house, and they have determined that if it does flood in that area, that the last 200 years that anybody's recorded a flood, water got 2 foot deep, so they're raising the house 3 foot. So those are things that you can advise your clients on, and give them some tips when they're rebuilding homes, or if you're happen to be working for a contractor and can get in there and speak with him at meetings when you're pre-selling stuff. Decorative concrete, we talked about a little bit already. These are some samples of those. Porcelain tile, solid vinyl or rubber tiles. Now with solid vinyl or rubber, if they're a floating floor, which means they're not glued to the concrete, water and moisture is still going to get under them, and you're still going to have to dry that out. But a lot of times you can take that floating floor loose and dry it and put it back down, and save the floor covering itself. If it's got glue under it, if it's waterproof glue and no water gets under it, then you can dry it in place. Ceramic tile, a lot of people want to pull that up and throw it away, but if ceramic tile has not lost bond to concrete, you can simply sanitize ceramic tile and leave it there. Stop and think about it. How many showers you've walked into has got ceramic tile in the floor of the shower? Well, when they get wet, you don't tear out the shower floor and put a new one in, because it's ceramic tile. So as long as those tiles don't break bond, then they can be left in place. You do need to put a disclaimer in your work orders that you're not responsible if it breaks bond down the road, and make sure that everybody understands that. And you can tell in the simple test method of telling that is sort of peck on it with the end of a metal object like a pocket knife, and it'll sound really hollow if it's a broken bond. If it hadn't, it'll sound like you're pecking on solid concrete. So just don't hit it, just peck on it a little bit. It's pretty easy to tell when they've broken bond and when they hadn't. Showing here some exterior stucco. The generic name for it is called EIFS, exterior insulated finished stucco. So there is styrofoam in between your insulated stucco, and that styrofoam may be water resistant and it may not be. But when you get in flood water, if you get water trapped in there behind your base coat and your finish coat of that stucco, then you're probably going to have a problem there, unless they had it proper weep holes in it and used the proper type of insulation. So be cautious of that. Don't dry it and leave some stuff in there wet, and then 6 months down the road it'll delaminate, and they'll try to come back and make it your problem. So make sure you properly test that and know what's going on with it. So different type of resistant materials for wall finishes. Again, we talked about removable wainscoting or moldings that can be cleaned and replaced. You don't see a lot of that now. I think you'll see a lot more of it in flood prone areas, even now and in the future, but it's not something that's, going into every new house that you see right now. They simply don't. The contractors and right now the insurance companies and the bank simply know that houses are designed not to get wet. And if they do get wet from any water source, you've got a problem. But when you've got buildings and structures that are in a flood prone area, then they tend to look at it a little bit different. So, vinyl wallpaper gets moisture behind it. It's hard to get that moisture out. You can dry through a paper wallpaper, but if it's a vinyl wallpaper, you can't. Now, a really thick vinyl wallpaper, such as you find in the hallways of a hotel, a lot of times you can simply pull that up and push pin it up to the wall if you've got 2 or 3 foot of it wet, and then dry the wall, and that can be put back down. Hotels just can't run down to Wallpapers or Us and buy wallpaper. Every floor has to match, and the corporate entities such as Holiday Inn or Marriott picks that wallpaper and carpet out long before, and you just can't come in there in most cases and put temporary floor covering or temporary wall covering back. So sometimes they'll go to extraordinary lengths to temporarily dry that stuff, even though they may put in for a full renovation later. But they may go to a lot of extra length to temporarily dry it and get it replaced back down where they can stay in business. As the most famous guy that I know that teaches how to sell to hotels and to buildings like that and teaches the marketing on it is Mr. Dick Wagner. And he has a very famous saying at hotels: live by heads and beds. If they don't have heads and beds, they're not making any money. And I'm sure Mr. Wagner can tell you a lot more about that, but that's the motto of the hotels. And a lot of times they don't care. You just got to get in there, and you might have to do some stuff temporary and come back and do it permanently later. There's different types of foam board and paperless wallpaper. They absorb little water or maybe no water. They dry quickly without damage. On the other side, if you got OSB panels or plywood or paper face drywalls, they can have permanent damage from delamination or from swelling. So those are the different type of materials. Guys, I think you all already know this. You simply cannot dry a building if you don't know what material you're drying. So you've got to know what you're drying and how it's going to dry out before you can put a drying plan together. Raised flooring is fairly popular these days. You see it in a lot of different buildings. Don't really have a lot to do with I want to get away from the water. It's just got to do with giving airflow under there, giving room for insulation, and giving some room to breathe under there. But you'll run into some raised flooring. Once again, you don't want to come in and dry your finished floor and your insulation's pretty dry, and then you got 2 inches of water standing below the floor and never did investigate that. So again, know what you're drying. There are also mold existing improvements. Materials that won't mold, paperless sheetrock will be one of those. It would be mold resistant. Mold will grow on glass. It actually grows on the dust that's on the glass, but you can walk in a lot of times and see mold, straight on glass. See it on shower doors a lot, and it's only stainless steel track or aluminum track and glass there, and mold still growing there fairly rampantly. So nothing is quote unquote mold proof, but you do have mold resistant materials. Now, with a paperless drywall with mold on it, it can be cleaned. Now you say, well, how'd I get to the backside? Well, that could be true. So you may have to take half of the drywall down and clean it from the backside if you had mold or if you had sewage water in it. But still, it's better than tearing all the sheetrock out when you're dealing with a material that's non-porous. And more different construction designs from hurricane impact and codes. So we went from Louisiana, now this is a Florida code. And it shows you different ways that you have to build a building down there to make it withstand hurricane pressures better. And guys, there's no rhyme or reason to that. It changes from year to year, from time to time. And Mr. Wagner lives down there, and he could be able to tell you a good bit about that as well. But you just have to inspect what you're drying and know how it's built. And sure, fat chance that you're gonna find blueprints. If you did, they stored them in the basement and they got wet and destroyed. So don't have basements in Florida, I don't think, but they do in other areas. But you've got to inspect what you're drying and know what you're drying and where water and mold both can hide in those areas. Different types of washable and drainable walls that are built with some moisture in mind. You're not going to find these anywhere except in flood prone areas, and even some of those areas might have one design on the bottom floor or two and a different design on the top floor or two. So you've got to know, which is which and which floor is built which way. So this is a wall that is built to leak. This is a water system. It's actually a plastic or polymer type of baseboard there. You can see at the bottom it's epoxied to the baseboard. See at the top it has an air crack where it shows you the water running down the wall into the baseboard. And in a basement they'd actually drill holes in the base of the wall and invite groundwater to come in. So in this system they want the water to come in, they want it to get in that track, and then that track leads to the outside somewhere or to a sump pump pit where the water drains in that pit and pumps outside. So that's like one company that sells that would be like All Dry Basement Systems or Be Dry Basements or something like that. But if you run into that plastic baseboard that's built like that, that's what it's for. You certainly don't want to tear the plastic baseboard out so you can dry behind it, because by design it's supposed to be wet back there for most of the time. Closed cell insulation's a spray foam. You can get spray foam in either closed cell or open cell. Open cell breathes, closed cell does not. If you get closed water behind closed cell between it and the exterior sheeting, you're going to have to take that out. But if you get water in open cell, you're going to have to take that out also. Once again, that's where a hammer probe comes in handy. Thermal imaging is useful, but not as accurate in that sense most of the time as a hammer probe would be. So, but if you've got closed cell insulation, then a lot of the times water will not get behind the sheathing, and you don't have to take that out. It can be washed. Water's not going to go through it. Simply, wash it and clean it, sanitize it like you would any other non-porous material. Here are some FEMA websites, some government websites, Louisiana websites, and things to where you can gain a lot more information about the particulars of waterproof homes and waterproof buildings and stuff like that. Again, we go everywhere from building a house that won't do that to using the flex tape and trying to keep the water out of the doors and everything. And that looks strange in the commercial, maybe 100% correct. It may be overstating it, but let's face it, it helps with sandbags. If you're trying to keep the water coming from under a door, they place sandbags there, and that will keep a bunch of water from coming in, but no sandbag is watertight. So if you've got some waterproof tape that you've got on a wall there, then that certainly helps the water from seeping under that door. You may still get a little water in, but chances are you won't get as much in there. Once again, just know what you're drying, know how you're drying it, and know that there are different materials out there. So you can use this information you've gained here today, plus what you can get on these websites, in a couple of different ways. Again, you need to know it as a drying contractor when you run into those that are built that way, and you need to realize that, hey, this drywall is not a paperback. It don't have to be torn out. It can be cleaned, and it's going to dry really, really quick. And so you need to know that. The other way you can use it is when you're marketing and talking to people at the Chamber of Commerce, and maybe after some floods or whatever, and you're marketing to people, and you can educate them on how to make their home more flood resilient to where they won't have as much damage if they ever have any damage, or if they have damage again if they've already been damaged. So my name's Scott Tarpley. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a call at any time. I hope you've learned a lot out of it today, and we will talk to you later.